Hello, and welcome back to the overview of the world system of bondage and separation from life. This is part two, and in part two, we will go through the basic steps for the implementation of the containment field, essentially the legalization of the bondage system, creating a uniformity, which is very important to understand, of the legal system and the monetary system and the structure for the bonding of the living being, the flesh and the blood, and the soul and the presence, the being presence of each and every one of us in this realm, on this planet. So that's our theme, the implementation of the containment field in part two. We start around the time of the end of the Civil War, starting with the implementation of the creation of the civil body, the much touted Civil Rights Act. Most people think of that in modern times as 1964, but the first Civil Rights Act was in 1866. There's a very precise reason for that, which you will learn not only in this section, but throughout this work. The Civil Rights Act and the creation of the civil body has to do with the attachment of Roman civil law to the domestic system through the legal and the monetary system. Why is that important? What is Roman civil law? Well, essentially, Roman civil law is the rules and the codes of containment for the conquered, militarily conquered territories, people, and persons. This has been going on since the Roman Empire, 2,000 plus years ago. So all of Europe, or most of Europe, was conquered by the Romans, and therefore Roman civil law was implemented. Later in the 1500s, the position of the emperor of the Holy Roman Empire was shifted to the king of Spain in 1520, and hence all of Latin America as a conquered territory was put under Roman civil law. So we have Roman civil law in Europe, we have it in all of Latin America. And by 1866, we have the beginning of the implementation of Roman civil law into the American system. Essentially, that took place between the 1860s and the 1930s. So that is our implementation of the containment field as is discussed and detailed in this part two of the overview book. So we go through many elements of that. The implementation of monetized debt, martial law, the fusion of law and equity started in England in 1873 with something called the Judicature Acts, and eventually was implemented in America in the 1930s with the creation of something called the Federal Rules of Civil Procedure. These became the rules of federal courts. No longer was there law and equity in their true essential characters and natures, but it was all civil rules, civil procedure, federal rules of civil procedure. And then if you look through all of the United States, you will see there are many codes, including the Code of Civil Procedure. There's codes of the Penal Code and the Tax and Revenue Code and administrative codes and all of that. These are all essentially derivatives of the Roman civil law, which is basically the attachment to Roman code for conquered people and territories, hence the beginning as the 1866 first Civil Rights Act. There was numerous others in the late 1860s, early 1870s, all the way to 1964. So that's the key to the implementation of the containment field through the legal and the monetary that attaches to us through from birth until death, through the initiation of the birth certificates and the statistics of vital records, and all the rest that's derived from that, including and ultimately the monetary system and all the contracts that we enter into, from utility bills to bank accounts to creating companies and becoming registered voters, and all of that. That's essentially all of our contractual agreement to be attached to the containment field. We go into the implementation of martial rule and ultimately martial law. This started in the 1860s during the Civil War. 1862, the implementation of something called the Lieber Code. The Lieber Code were the rules of the United States Army for the management of martial rules in battle and also as it related to the conquered territories. This was implemented after the Civil War with the passage of the Reconstruction Acts, forcing the conquered South into a conquered nation or conquered territory status that eventually became true for all of the states by the 1930s. The Lieber Code evolved or migrated into international treaty law at the Hague Convention, the World Court, 1899 and 1907. That's when treaties known as rules for war on land, meaning they were bringing martial rules that were basically maritime onto the land and the rules of conquered nations, essentially what I've just discussed. So all of this is presented in this part 2, and it leads up to how commerce was implemented to become basically a forward face for the civil body and the attachment of the civil code, and as well as what is the opposite of that, what our work is about, which is status, standing, and capacity. How status is actually defined, what it really means, the root of the word, and how the setup of a two-layered estate system with what's called the decedent estate, which means one who is dying, which is the equivalent or attached to the name, the franchise, the vital record account, all of that, the birth certificate, and the underlying estate where the equity is held. So this created the separation between public, where monetized debt is attached to the living being and requires that being to be conformed to and conforming to the civil code, civil procedures, and all the rest of that. And what's on the private side, which is the underlying estate, the ancestral lineal estate, which is where the equity is held. So the equity is held in the underlying estate. It's what we call ancestral lineal estate because the lineal passage through time comes from our ancestry and attaches or connects to, better word to say, connects to our living flesh, because the ancestral estate is essentially the genetics that we inherit from both of our ancestral lines, from mother and father. And ultimately, this is what the system is going after. It is designed to bond us to the false narrative reality, to the civil codes, to the debt and all of that, the commercial system, and to attach to as the collateral attachment for their purposes to our genetics. And that's really what we get into later in this work and in the bigger picture, what Freedom Absolute is all about. And of course, Pantera Vita, Gemstone University, Gem.University, and all of that. So learning about trusts and equity, the estates, the separation between public and private. This is what's in our master law class. This is what's in the general education member levels that you can enter into by subscription through Freedom Absolute, and then you have access to the GEM level in Gem.University. So all of this, including the overview, is simply that. It's an overview. It's an introduction. If you are passionate about learning about freedom and truly achieving freedom absolute, then I encourage you and I invite you to become a member. Subscribe at Freedom Absolute on Patreon or Substack and enter into a world of true knowledge and integration and personal work leading to freedom absolute. So as I said, basically, you have no access to law when you are bankrupt. and we are the bonded surety attached to the bankrupt franchise, and hence we have no standing. We are a bankrupt as far as the system is concerned. Without any standing, you have no capacity to state a claim. You have no capacity to stake a claim, meaning put 4 stakes and create a boundary, metes and bounds of a tract of land that you have standing on. And this is what you will learn in our courses, in the Master Law course, and of course, Status Correction, how to do that and how to implement that into your life. So, so that's basically what you're going to hear and view and learn in the second episode of the overview of the world system. And thank you very much for joining us. And I look forward to seeing you soon in the succeeding episodes and possibly as a member. Thank you very much.
Part 2. The implementation of full containment. The transition of the de jure government to a corporate services entity that was later defined as a municipal corporation per the Clearfield Doctrine began with the first Civil Rights Act in 1866 that established the civil body within the federal jurisdiction and was locked into place with the Act of February 21, 1871, that established such a municipal government for the city of Washington, District of Columbia. For a full list of the key events of this period, see Part 13. The United States Incorporated was put into bankruptcy on March 9, 1933, also detailed in Part 13, after which a new system of legal construction was begun that was to be built over the following decades to bring about the creation of monetized debt and commercial systems within the context of what is discussed above and under a system of full military occupation, martial law. Law and equity became fused in the hybrid system centered within codified rules of civil procedures, so that the legal and judicial system morphed into a system to protect the interests of the ultimate holders of beneficial interests, the Federal Reserve and its private owners, against the pledged securities of the people, lands, properties, and labor of the nation. This system is known as the Federal Rules of Civil Procedure, FRCP, the foundation of which established the fusion of law and equity as it had first been implemented by the Judicature Acts of England in 1873 and 1875. This is summed up in Rule Number 2 of the FRCP that states, "There is one form of action, the civil action." This clearly indicates that although law and equity are present in appearance, the system henceforth is about the containment of the population within the civil body in federal jurisdiction for the administration of the ongoing bankruptcy under martial authority and military occupation, and lacks the true substance, nature of law and equity. This was advanced with commensurate systems adopted in each of the newly created state of states, which were set up as corporate subdivisions of the United States, now to be managed as a debtor in possession in bankruptcy, with each successive level and layer, from state to county to city to municipality to individual franchise, all being subdivisions thereof. Each one of these has some form of codified system of civil procedure. Ultimately, they are all about one thing: the management of the monetized system of commercial paper that bonds each participant as a debtor facility. A very neat linguistic trick to confuse and misdirect the people is done by the definition of something called "in this state" and "in the state," and variations thereof in different states. It all seems innocent enough if one is dealing with a legal issue in California and sees those phrases. It would be simple enough to assume that meant one was within the proper state of California. But California State is not the same as State of California, nor is either of them the same as all caps State of California. When one is operating within the civil containment field of the latter and comes across the phrases quoted above, one is actually within the civil containment field of federal jurisdiction as herein described. To confirm this, we find at California Revenue and Taxation Code Section 6017 that in this state and in the state means within the exterior limits of the state of California and includes all territory within these limits owned by or ceded to the United States of America. This effectively means if one, for purposes of revenue and taxation, proceeds in this state, they are actually doing so within federal territory under territorial jurisdiction of the United States of America, aka the United States. And don't forget, everything is about revenue and taxation, which we understand once we look at the word revenue as to revenue, as in change venue from one jurisdiction to another jurisdiction. It is all about wordplay and smoke and mirrors. To add to the complexity of it all, we also have to understand that starting in the Civil War and post-war period, along with the creation of the corporate overlay, we have the parallel track of creating a system of military occupation of conquered territory and people. The defeated southern states were never allowed to return to the Union as free states. They were placed in the position of martial law districts overseen by the military conqueror, the United States, accomplished by the Reconstruction Acts starting in 1867. Something referred to as the Lieber Code was issued during the Civil War in 1863 to establish the military rules for war on land and how conquered territories were to be managed and controlled. The Lieber Code then morphed into the 20th century equivalent on an international level through successive phases and treaties issued through conventions at The Hague that defined who were enemy combatants, belligerents, and other rules for militarily occupied territories and people. A belligerent was defined in one such treaty in 1899 as one who took up arms to defend against an invading force on the land, as that treaty had to do with rules of war on land. This is a very key point to understand, as this will progressively be hidden in plain sight when we come to the understanding of what exactly is a man or woman who engages in commercial activities upon the field of battle known as commerce. Another important point to consider is how the rules of engagement or war on the high seas, controlled by a system of law called admiralty and maritime, were subtly integrated and hidden within the context of issues concerning war on the land. This is important because true law is rooted and sits on the land. Equity, as it concerns the rights of beneficiaries of trusts and estates, is also rooted in law and has to do with land and landed estates. True substantive rights, inherent and unalienable, are held within one's standing in law and equity that is concurrent with one's standing on the land. Conversely, rules that control bankruptcy and bankrupts are those of the sea, as are civil systems of code and procedure. Additionally, by fine tricks of manipulative layering of symbol and language, the traditions of commerce and the law merchant were progressively morphed to include the sea of commerce and commercial vessels and the commercial field of battle, so that eventually we became known within the post-bankruptcy civil and legal system as civilly dead ghost-like apparitions that could only eat and drink, buy and sell, and pursue gainful enterprise as wraith-like beings operated on and through commercial franchise vessels licensed to operate on the sea of commerce, controlled and controllable within rules of admiralty and bankruptcy via millions of civil codes and rules of civil procedure. Commercial solutions are no solutions at all. In the past 30 years, there have been many people in pursuit of solutions out of this mess. In the mid to late 1990s and into the 2000s and 2010s, a set of so-called solutions emerged that seemed to have all the answers within the commercial arena. These were known by various names, such as acceptance for value, administrative processes, perfection of commercial liens, notarial protests, and secured party creditor. They were all based on the principles and understanding of the UCC system in the presumption that that was the ultimate field in which remedy could be achieved. In many instances, the appearance of remedy was achieved, and many went out on the circuit to teach and promote their knowledge and experience. Many thousands followed those leads, and unfortunately, many of those ended up paying significant prices in terms of time, money, and freedom, as one by one each alleged remedy became another quicksand pit of consequences. Even today, the Internet is rife with websites promoting many so-called solutions, even though most of the originators of such ended up in prison. What they all failed to comprehend was the fatal flaws hidden within the fabric of commercial processes. These fatal flaws had to do with the deeper layers of the system having to do with bankruptcy, admiralty, civil procedures, commercial construction, debtor-creditor relations, international treaties, definitions of enemy and belligerent status, and the true nature of commerce as defined herein. In short, it all gets down to three important words: status, standing, and capacity, which we will thoroughly explore and define in this document. We have discussed the normal status that almost all beings hold at this time, that of bonded surety to a bankrupt franchise. The United States system is the linchpin and is mostly the focus of this paper, but the same is true with variations in every nation of the world. All are in fact corporations channeled through the U.S. securities system. All are bankrupt. All have central banks of issue that issue monetized debt that bonds the people as sureties and perpetual debt service slaves. The word status is derived from the same etymological roots as the words state, estate, statute, and static. Each one of us is considered a state in fact, in static/fixed form, like a statue frozen in time, with property titles attached thereto as an estate. All property and land in this world is held in and as estates. We will return to this key and central point later in our discussion. For now, just understand that we all have a status that defines the elements of the estate associated thereto, and in most cases, our status is that of a bonded surety to a bankrupt franchise. In that status, the estate is known as a decedent, which is literally defined as one who is dying. If one looks in a modern dictionary, a decedent is generally regarded as one who has died, but the original definition remains as one who is dying. Thus, it is always important to not simply accept how a term is generally used or defined. The original and literal definition has not been removed, only overlaid, and is still operative, especially when used in a legal context. Standing has to do with inherent capacity when it comes to law or the lack thereof. As a bankrupt, we are considered to lack standing to state a claim. This is evidenced by the continuous use of Federal Rules of Civil Procedure Rule 12b-6 by the courts to dismiss many cases on the simple grounds, per said rule, that the case is dismissed for failure to state a claim upon which relief can be granted. This is also reflected in state rules of procedure. Additionally, there is a parallel set titled Federal Rules of Criminal Procedure that makes it appear that there is a difference, but when we dig deeper, we find that in fact it is all a matter of commercial transgressions. We also do not have any access to true common law with that status, and therefore cannot bring a court of record pursuant to the common law with the status of a bankrupt. All rights, property, and titles are based on the inherent right to state a claim. So, as a bankrupt, we have forfeited that right and thus have no standing in law, nor the capacity to claim the hidden equitable rights, values, and interests attached to the underlying ancestral lineal estate. Such rights are held by the beneficiary and heir to the estate. However, in our current status as a bonded surety, we are considered to have abandoned our true estate. When there is substance in the standing of the heir, he is considered a living beneficiary, but the lack of standing due to being the bonded surety to a bankrupt franchise places us as civilly dead in the system, and thus we can only have limited beneficial use of property that effectively belongs to another who holds superior title. Without standing, one cannot claim rights, stand on the land, or have access to law or equity in the truest sense of those terms. With impaired or bankrupt status and lack of standing, we therefore have no capacity. Capacity is the inherent power to assert authority and control over property, land, law, rights, and essentially the substance of life. Our current status as bonded sureties without standing leaves us bereft of any real capacity, any real freedom, or any control over our lives.